In an effort to prevent any further damage to the environment, all of us are being urged to reduce our so-called carbon footprint. And until now, most of the concern has focused on either the earth beneath our feet or the atmosphere above. But something terrible is also happening way out at sea, where many currents converge and where a great deal of damage is being done. Brian Ruby now reports from the Pacific Ocean.
If by chance you are missing a basketball, you may be glad to know it's been found in the Pacific Ocean. It was there along with giant tangles of rope, sunken snack food bags, a plastic six-pack ring, and thousands upon thousands of plastic bags billowing under the ocean like jellyfish. And that's not all.
Pulling up debris out of the ocean, we've got things that are common everyday items, like golf balls and glue sticks.
Been looking across the whole Pacific to find Davy Jones's suitcase.
How about melted milk crates, fistfuls of toothbrushes, and brightly colored plastic umbrella handles?
Do you have any idea why are there so many umbrella handles in the ocean?
There's the same reason why there's so many toothbrushes in the ocean. It's because they are throwaway products. They're cheap now. An umbrella used to be something you might keep for a lifetime. Now an umbrella is for one storm.
Charles Moore is an independently wealthy man who decided to spend his life studying the ocean. He's credited with discovering 10 years ago what has become known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the oceanic dump of the Pacific Rim.
Glass bottle with particles.
The garbage patch is created by the Pacific currents, carrying refuse from North America, Asia, and the islands, then concentrating it into a continent-sized swirl of flotsam, estimated to contain 3.5 million tons of junk, 80% of it plastic. Moore has focused his study on an area twice the size of Texas, about 1,000 miles from North America. Sailing his research catamaran Alpida, Moore and a small crew drag a trawling device through the garbage patch to study the content of ocean water. And what they find, he describes as a plastic soup, more plastic in some waters than plankton, the basic food organism of the ocean.
It has a few insects in it, like halibades. It has some zooplankton. But overwhelmingly what we're seeing here are plastic particles. The ocean has become a plastic soup. This is the soup.
The problem with plastic in particular is that it doesn't quite float. It doesn't sink either. Sunlight and salt water slowly break it down until bags become shreds and hard objects break down to multicolored chips.
This is the new beach sand that we're seeing throughout the Pacific Islands. It's a sand made of plastic.
And is there any real sand mixed in here? I see a little bit, yeah.
Tiny bit of volcanic origin sand and coral. Formerly, we got sand by breaking down rock and coral. Now we're getting sand by breaking down plastic.
You're gonna want to come to port. Starboard engine reverse.
Some of it comes from ships, fishing floats, a styrofoam buoy. But the vast majority of plastic garbage in the ocean comes from land. Bottles and cups dropped in the street, washed by rain into the storm sewer, into the rivers, and eventually the ocean.
The ocean is downhill from everywhere. Things blow and drift into the ocean. They degrade into these particles and then become part of the ocean's load. And the consequences of this are currently unknown.
They do know some obvious consequences. This is a jellyfish fouled and caught in rope. Birds and sea life take the plastic for food.
Here I'm seeing something that appears to be a jellyfish. If I was a turtle, I would think that's probably a jellyfish.
But that's a plastic bag.
But it's a balloon maybe.
Albatross chicks have been killed by a diet of plastic bits. And there's a question of what happens when the plastic breaks down even further.
The bigger chips turn to smaller chips, and we eventually get dust. Our concern is that this dust then goes to the molecular level and invades the entire food web in the ocean.
On a recent cruise inside Long Beach Harbor, Moore and his crew used simple fishing nets to dredge up plastic waste headed out into the Pacific.
Jerky, plenty of jerky bags. And power bars, looks like a power bar. Yep, there's a granola bar. And the Ziploc baggies won't stop. Look at these Ziploc baggies, one after the other.
Moore says the level of ocean trash is only increasing, a reflection of ever more disposable packaging. He tracks the trends, not at the store, but in the ocean.
The metallized chip bags, you know, it's much easier to keep freshness in potato chips if you put a thin coating of metal on the inside of the bag. As soon as that started happening, we started finding these metallized chip bags out in the ocean.
The Algeta returned from its most recent voyage with its rigging strung with found objects. Moore just hates to leave the junk floating out there.
This is stuff that was collected by Captain Moore and the crew.
He turns his findings over to the Sea Lab in Redondo Beach, which analyzes the content and concentration of plastic in the water.
No matter whether you're studying the surface, 10 meters, 30-meter samples, or 100-meter samples, every sample that we've looked at in the Pacific Ocean has had plastic in it.
It's all suspended through the depth of the water.
Correct.
They even find what are called nurdles, pellets of unmanufactured plastic,
Another pre-production plastic pellet.
spilled on factory lots and railway sidings, washed to the ocean.
The levels are increasing. The amount of packaging is increasing. The throwaway concept of living is proliferating, and it's showing up in the ocean.
He offers no hope of cleaning it up. Straining the ocean for plastic would be beyond the budget of any country, and it might kill untold amounts of sea life in the process. The solution, Moore says, is to stop the plastic at its source. Stop it on land before it falls into the ocean.
There's your typical t-shirt shopping bag.
And in a plastic-wrapped and packaged world, he doesn't hold out much hope for that either. This is Brian Rooney for Nightline in Long Beach, California.
Okay. Getting back to the details described by that, which I think is a pretty good explanation. We're going to talk about some of this research that we've done. This particular diagram shows the area of the garbage patch here and the sample area that we did that found 6 times as much plastic as plankton. Now, how does that originate? Why is there a garbage patch? Well, this is a 3-month running average. In other words, every 3 months, Jim Ingram, whose life work was to model surface currents in the Pacific Ocean, he computed the average over those 3 months of where that H was. H stands for a high. And what does a high pressure system mean? It means exactly what it says. It's heavy. The atmosphere is heated at the equator, and as it descends at the poles, it builds this mountain over the mid-latitudes. And that mountain of air weighs down on the surface of the ocean, so that wherever that H is, that's where that's like the peak of this mountain of air. And so what we get is a kind of a toilet bowl effect in the northern hemisphere, the currents created by this high, as this air slowly descends down this mountain, it twirls in a clockwise direction, and it pulls debris off the Pacific Rim and sends it out. And the H, the area under the H, is practically always calm. It's not moving much water around, so that's why this trash can come to rest there and exist there for decades. Now, if we look at this phenomenon in a time series, and we start some trash coming off the coast of Japan and some more trash coming off the north coastal area of the United States and Canada, we see that after a half a year, our stuff is kind of sticking close to the coast and heading south on the California current, whereas the Kuroshio current in Japan is pushing this stuff straight out into the North Pacific. After a year, it's reached the Northwest Hawaiian Islands archipelago, that newly created largest marine reserve in the world that stretches 1,500 miles northwest from Honolulu. And after 3 years, we started to see this garbage patch forming, but remember I said that funny looking fork, that Japanese fork, was from here? Well, now you can see why. Our funny looking forks are heading over towards the Philippines and Vietnam, and